Alright, welcome back, and I'm gonna show a small demonstration. So the code is pretty bare at the moment. I didn't have much time, I just started working on it, and I wanted to show you a little bit the reason why I was starting working on it. So if we are going to the website that's suggested on the GitHub, link in the description, of course, you'll see a small demonstration. So it's not really looking pretty at the moment, but what's interesting here is the data that you get from the endpoints I've crafted. So we'll be delving a little bit more into those endpoints later. But the two first ones are going to be typical GraphQL endpoints. So let's say I have a list of tweets and I have a list of authors. So in that fake data that I have here, I have 20 tweets and 10 authors. So 2 tweets per author. And you can see here, I'm going to zoom a little bit. You can see here the tree-like structure that GraphQL sends back. So we're going to delve into the queries later on. But I get all the tweets, so it's an array of tweets. And within each tweet, I want to get the author, so the ID and the name. So it works pretty well, all good, all good, all good, until we reach the authors, which is basically the same information that we got here. So we get the same ID, same name. So this could be referenced to not repeat that information, because then you will need logic on the front end side that will get those authors and match them with the tweets if you want to do like a circular structure, like a graph structure. So we'll see also why you only get why you don't get tweets here, and the reason is we are using the default GraphQL ways of doing things, which is so I'm loading data, of course, from JSON files, not querying anything, but you get here the resolvers. So fetch all tweets are resolvers. I'm gonna just like, so here is our resolvers. So tweets, fetch all tweets. So we are fetching all tweets. We want to get all the tweets and we want to populate them. So generate functions that will load the authors into those tweets. So we populate, so we get the same ID, same tweets. So here it's the function where, for instance, if you use MongoDB, you want to return the underscore doc things, but you also define the logic to find like edges into your graphs. So you want to find the author that's linked here. So in my case, for instance, the first one is just the ID 1. And here we go, get author by ID. I'm looking, get author by ID, there we go. And I'm finding the one with the actual ID. So here is where you would do your MongoDB or MySQL or whatever database you use, queries and fetching things. So of course, if you have lots of different things, you also use data loaders, but want to keep it very simple here. And the reason why we don't have any tweets in the authors is because I didn't define any within my author.json. So everything is into tweets. Here we get the ID of the tweets, the text, and the author with their ID there. So what I'm doing is, if we are getting, let's go, if we're getting all the tweets, there we go, we populate. There we go, here we get if the query to the endpoint is contain request information from the authors. We are getting here get author by ID using tweet.authors, and there we go, and we populate. The problem is within the data itself, there is no information back from okay, that author, how many tweets did he wrote. So we can't go, even though there is logic here, get tweets by ID, there is none in the data, so we are always using that empty array. So that's what we get. We get that empty array of tweets. So if we up the level a little bit, we're going to the GraphQL, the TreeQL endpoint, which is also a GraphQL endpoint. So we use all the GraphQL logic, and actually I'm going to get here, and this would be this function. So the tweets now just load straight up the object, and you'll see here the difference is I'm loading data from graph, which is just a small file that actually load the data, but for each tweet change the property author and push the author straight within the tweet. So you have like a reference within the tweet, and in the same time it's also check if there are tweets, because we see that there's none defined by default. If there are tweets within that author, we are pushing that same tweet to the author itself. And if there is none yet, we're just pushing an array with only one element, which is that specific tweet. And what you get here is a graph structure. So if I pull this, that's kind of the structure that we're looking for, and that's what you will get, and that's also the type of structure that will throw a JSON circular error that we'll see later on. So for instance, here I have two tweets linked to the same author, so the same ID, and those tweets are here an array of two different things. So if for some reason you want to go super deep into your graph and you want to query, okay, author ID 1, I want the tweet, the first tweet of that author dot the author dot the first tweet dot the author dot the first tweet dot the author, and you can do like here in a loop because you have a graph structure which is circular. So it's very convenient if you can load graph object, like circular objects within GraphQL. It's very convenient because then you can just load it into your resolvers, like the array itself, and depending on how deep you're asking for in your query in your GraphQL endpoint, you will get that data, and you don't even have to write any logic because your object can go as deep as you want. So for instance, if I go here, TreeQL, you can see here the query that I'm auto-executing, and here I'm querying the GraphQL with the schema that I've already done. You can check all of this onto the GitHub repo if you want. Yeah, and the resolver is just straight up sending the array of tweets and exploiting the inherent graph structure of JavaScript. So it's very convenient. The problem is if you want to go So it would be circular. If you want to go straight up and you want to bypass GraphQL, you will get into the circular problem. So if I'm just trying to JSON stringify my data, because at the end that's what I want to transfer my whole database, for instance, you just can't using straight up JSON, and you will need to add other package that basically define how many layers and how many nested levels you want to go deep, and prevent like the circular things. So we're still super early stage, but the goal is to get something that looks a little bit like this. It would be straight up from GraphQL itself, and rather than using double-quoted strings, those would be straight up references with understanding of what the reference is, so you don't have to compute anything on the client side. Those would be, yeah, so you would get all the tweets with a reference to reference.tweetById1 and all the authors. And there you go for the references, you get tweets by ID, and then you get your first tweet, ID1, text, and the author is also a reference. So if I was querying that first tweet, I could access the author here by reference, and there I'll just get that information. And I could go back to the tweets because those tweets are also references. So I could just rebuild the circular infrastructure. So it would be very useful. For instance, if I have that author that wrote 25 tweets, I just update it once. I just change his name from that fake data to Arthur, for instance, and it will update on all of the tweets that are linked to this specific node. So that's the end goal, and also, of course, adding new ways to write that GON structure. So, for instance, single quoted, adding dates and everything. But the core is based on references to be able to rebuild those circular graph objects in JavaScript, which is the default way of how JavaScript works. So at the moment, I'm not far yet, sorry. I'm still in early stages, and you can see what an endpoint on current QL would look like. So at the moment, it's quite greedy. So it goes back to the JSON complete thing where you get the data, and the data is always a reference, which is a little bit strange. Maybe you don't want something like this, but here you would get, so the first, the data is an object. There you go, you get the first reference, and that object contains tweets with an array of tweets, author with an array of author. Here you can see the references are not by tweets or by author, they're just like by object, kind of. So you'll get reference 0 is the root, but then you get reference 1, which is a tweet, reference 2, which is an author, then reference 3, which is a tweet, and so on. But the structure just stays the same. It's a little bit less human readable, it's a little bit less human friendly, but this would work just the same as soon as I implement those references, not as strings, but as actual references. So the first tweet would be reference 1 that you can get here, reference 1, you get the ID, the author is the reference 2, which is conveniently just below. You get here the IDs, the name, go back to the different tweets, reference 1, which is this one, and also reference 21, which is down below, but basically does the same. So if I was to rebuild my object using this structure, I could just change that name, and this will update the author of the tweet 1 and also the one that's in reference 21. So we're going to see what's his actual ID. So the ID is 11 and reference 2. So this would work. I still need to add syntax and stop piggybacking on top of the JSON, but actually building my own data file and serializer and parser. So that's pretty much where I am at the moment. And if it's something that you would be interested in, make sure to comment what you would be willing to see as new features, but also what you would be, if you're willing to contribute, make sure to push pull requests on the GitHub. And I'm pretty sure this could be going very, very well. And this plugs very, very, very finely into the GraphQL ecosystem. So where you have actually the schema, which would be very useful to rebuild an actual tweet by ID kind of things, because you know that those tweets are tweets using the GraphQL schema. So it would be very, very convenient. All right, so I think that's all for that video, and I'll see you in the next status update. All right, cheers.